All right, let's jump right into this because Vikings training camp is only 11 days away. Rookies report on that day, and then veterans will follow a few days after that. And I Bleav fans can attend July 28th if I have that. Maybe it's the 29th, but it's all really near. Regular season is exactly 60 days away. So we want to get into some of this training camp stuff. Bryant, I'm going to start with you. We've been talking about training camp now, you and I, for about 4 or 5 years. So I want any new viewers and listeners, are your memories of training camp mostly positive, negative, right in the middle? What say you?
I just feel like training camp always reminds me of Groundhog's Day.
Yeah.
You crack up what day it is, you do the same thing day in and day out. You really have very limited access to the outside world, so you really don't know what's going on for those first like maybe 2 weeks of training camp. And it's just a constant just grind and just meetings and practice and things like that. And then you're going against the same guys every day, your teammates. So you kind of look forward to when you have like when another team comes in and practices against you, kind of look forward to that because now you get to, put some of your skills against somebody fresh who doesn't know you as well and things like that. But it's just the grind at that point. Once you go there, you're pretty much locked in and it's time for the season to really start and you really just are away from like the outside world.
And what are guys doing now or back in your day in this last week or two? Are they finishing up vacations? Are they chilling at home? What are we
um,
doing?
a lot of guys are doing like last minute vacations, still getting their workouts in, just preparing for, then having to report, I think on the 24th or something like that, or at least the veterans. I know a lot of guys say they report on 24th. So just preparing to be in somewhat of a decent condition as they report. Some people may have to do a conditioning test if they didn't make their, 80% of the workouts like it used to be when I was there. Things like that, just trying to make sure you're in good shape and decent health as you go in there because you can't really get into football shape until you actually play football. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's like once you put the helmet on and get used to having the pads on and things like that, that's how to prepare you. But you can be in good like cardio shape.
The last thing I got for you on this topic, I'm curious, is what about free agents that might not sign until late in August, or some veterans that notoriously either skip camp or don't participate? Like, how do they get away with that? How can most of the team be at training camp and then either a signing late or somebody skipping? How can they get away with that?
I mean, they can get away with it by just staying in shape because once your number's
Okay.
called, you have to go there and be kind of prepared because you are going to miss the big chunk of training camp. So it's like you have to kind of just be there and kind of just be ready to go. And like for training camp, a lot of those things is about timing and steps and footwork and things like that. So some of them get to miss that. So you have to be really mentally focused and prepared and physically in some type of decent shape because you don't want to be too far behind.
Okay. All right, Ron, I'm going to launch into you with this. With training camp really, really close. What's one of your hottest takes about training camp or the rest of the Vikings summer that you want to share with the group?
Well, excuse me. I think I don't know if it's necessarily a hot take, but just kind of the integration and all the new faces on defense and kind of seeing how they all gel together, how they're all being used. Because the one thing that they have that they really didn't have last year, they have a lot of depth. You take, last year, Patrick Jones got a lot of run, and now he's, the fourth edge rusher, so to speak. So just seeing how Van Ginkel is being used, how Cashman, how he goes alongside next to Pace, and just kind of going from there. Even like Asamoah, I mean, they have a lot of athletic bodies in there. And I want to see how Flores uses them as a chess piece in order to kind of game plan for the season. So that to me it would be the biggest thing. I mean, obviously the quarterback is going to be the number one topic all training camp long, but staying away from that, I think defensively, just how they're gonna I mean, I don't think anyone would deny there's more talent on that side of the ball this year than there was last year. And last year they played pretty well for the most part, up until injuries started to catch up to them. So that'll be my favorite part of all the camp battles.
That's one of my sneaky things to watch for the 2024 Vikings. Is I have a feeling it's going to be a defense first enterprise. When we have a offense first head coach and kind of an offensive enterprise in the last two seasons, because we have a mystery at quarterback, whether or not either one of the guys will be good. All the personnel, to your point, that defense has added, I think, is bound to improve. And they were actually really, really, really good in the middle of the season last year. It's just that they finished on a sour note that when we think back to the memories of 2024, we don't put the defense in this really esteemed light. But I have a feeling that we'll be, praising the defense more so than the offense until we figure out if either of the quarterbacks are any good. Tyler, what about you? What's one of your hot takes for training camp for the rest of the summer?
Yeah. So my hot take here is that I think Levi Drake Rodriguez will win Mr. TCO and earn a spot on the 53-man roster over Jonah Williams, who they signed this offseason. It's a bit of a hot take considering that Drake Rodriguez is a 7th-round draft pick, more of a developmental guy, went to a small school at Texas Commerce. So he does have a bit of stuff to work on in terms of just his overall development, but he's the generic first one in, last one out, right? Given, his choice, he would sleep at the facility all day. He's just that kind of guy. And I think those are the kinds of guys who tend to make the back end of the roster, just the absolute grinders, lunch pail guys. I'm just going on and on with these generic catchphrases, but yeah. I would look out for Levi Drake Rodriguez as someone who can potentially make this roster, given just the overall lack of depth at the defensive line position. I mean, you have your 3 guys, Bullard, Harrison Phillips, and Jerry Tillery, but I feel like after that, it's all up for grabs. You've got Jonah Williams and second-year defensive lineman. I'm blanking on his name, Jaquelin Roy. So that's not a ton of depth. They did bring in Redmond as well. Played a little bit in the XFL or whatever they call it now.
UFL.
The UFL. Yeah. So we'll see how that shakes out, but I feel really good about Rodriguez.
Yeah, I like that take because if they really do believe in him, it would make more sense that they were rather quiet at defensive tackle for a lot of the offseason besides the Tillery move. My hottest take, and I can't remember if I've hinted on it in this show with the Bleav crew before, is that there's no true nose tackle, no huge guy. And that leads me to believe that Taki Taimani, if I'm saying his name right, he's big-bodied from University of Oregon. I think he has a puncher's chance to make the roster. And in fact, I think I did a defensive projection about a week ago. And he got a roster spot for me because I don't know what else they're going to do. If they don't have him, and they don't bring back Sheldon Day, for example, they don't have any nose tackles. They just have a bunch of defensive tackles, which maybe that's the way the Bryant Flores defense operates. But to me, you need at least one guy, usually 1, 2, or 3, that are large, like, Linval Joseph. And we just don't have any. We call Harrison Phillips a nose tackle, and he does just fine. But I think that for depth's sake and for some run-stopping situations, downs, drives, that you want a large human being, and Taimani is that. All right, let's see. What do we got next here? Let's talk about J.J. McCarthy a little bit. So J.J. McCarthy was drafted in April. Immediately, we're like, all right, who's it going to be? Darnold, McCarthy in the week 1 setting, and it's kind of trended that it's going to be Sam Darnold. It would be a really large upset if J.J. McCarthy ended up as the QB1. But Paul Allen this week on K-Fans said that the new quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, is probably vying for a QB2 job. So basically, it's him and Nick Mullins duking it out. Bryant, do you think that this guy we just drafted, would it be fine with you if he redshirts and watches for a year, or would you rather, take the Band-Aid off and see the guy right away?
I'll be okay if he sits back and learns the game for half the season. That should give him more time and get to really become a student and watch the guy in front of him. And I feel like at a certain point in the season, you never know with injury and everything where he has to step up. I just feel like he needs to really hone in and really pay attention to veterans and really take notes and study how to be a professional at this point.
Yeah, I should say on McCarthy that none of this is scathing. Like, he hasn't struggled. He hasn't not looked the part. It's just that Mullins, I guess, is so decent or respected by this coaching staff that it was rather fascinating that Paul Allen said we should be framing this as who's going to win QB2 rather than who's going to win QB1. And there is precedent for this. I looked it up. Jordan Love in 2020, he was the QB3 behind Kurt Benkert. So that's a reasonable example of one that kind of worked out, at least so far, for the Packers. So it wouldn't be doomsday. To me, it'd just be a little odd if McCarthy can't oust Nick Mullins. Ron, what are your thoughts on the topic?
Well, I think QB2 or 3, like it's all semantics, especially in today's day and age when you can dress 3 quarterbacks and it doesn't infringe on the active 45. So I think if McCarthy doesn't start, I think he will be the 3. And I don't think that's an indictment on him at all. I think it's just one, Nick Mullins has been here for a few years. It's almost like in the Sean Mannion case, whereas Sean Mannion was a smart guy, could hold the clipboard, but you never want to see him under center. Whereas at least if say Darnold, has an Aaron Rodgers like run where he's out 4 plays into the game, I don't think they turn to McCarthy. Again, I think he's strictly on the benchmarks that O'Connell has set out. So I think Nick Mullins would legitimately be the backup, regardless of how good McCarthy looks or anything like that. Not again, it's not an indictment on JJ. I think it's just where they're at. It's I don't, and Vikings Twitter will be set ablaze. People will be like, "Oh, it's a bust." It's like Quasi does it again. Like the loudest dumbasses will rise to the top in that regard. But I mean, I don't think that's a problem at all.
Tyler, what say you?
I actually want to ask Ron here something, if you can get him on the big screen.
Yeah.
So if the Vikings are in an absolute worst case scenario where Mullins is hurt, Darnold is hurt, is there any chance that they would turn to Jaren Hall before JJ McCarthy, given that Hall is in year 2 despite the lower pedigree?
I don't think they would. I think Jaren Hall is going to be on the practice squad. I mean, they're not keeping 4 quarterbacks. There's zero chance of that happening. And there's, a small percent reason why he should be kept over Nick Mullins. I think, again, I said it the last time we were on here. Nick Mullins has shown he can throw for a lot of yards in the NFL. It's the turnovers that's a problem. Sam Darnold and Jaren Hall haven't proven that they can throw for yards. So, I don't see Jaren Hall ever getting the nod ahead of JJ. Again, he's also older than JJ, or I mean, like, older in obviously he's a year in, but is he going to be 26 this year? So it's not like he's a raw guy that you want to get him reps. Like I think the book as a Vikings quarterback is written for Jaren Hall. Now that's not to say he can't be a viable backup for years to come, but I don't think there's anything to expect out of him.
Yeah, that breaks my heart as a Jaren Hall truther. I was at that Green Bay game late in the season, and my heart was broken. I'm still just trying to come up with any little argument that I can to try and say, hey, don't forget about this guy we drafted in the 5th round last year. But you're a smart guy. It's why I asked you.
Appreciate it.
In regards to JJ McCarthy versus Nick Mullins, obviously McCarthy's going to be quarterback 3, at least for now. Like, I would say there's a 70% chance that Mullins is QB2 to start the season. But JJ McCarthy has been working out at TCO all summer long, even during this extended break in between minicamp and training camp. So it's not far-fetched to suggest that, he has a good training camp and they like him more than Mullins. I don't think they'd put him on the spot like that if, they felt like he wasn't ready. But, I don't want to count out a winner. And I know it's a team sport and all that, but, he's got an impressive resume and maybe he's more prepared than we give him credit for as a 21-year-old. But it's nice to be in a position where that doesn't have to be the case. If McCarthy isn't ready, we don't have to say, okay, you're the 1st round quarterback, you're gonna be QB2, because Mullins did quite fine last year. It was just the turnovers, and one ought to think if you can limit the turnovers for Nick Mullins, you can generate offense if he needs to come in a pinch. So we'll see what happens. I I'd like to be optimistic about our young quarterbacks, but we've got a solid starter and an established back.
The other
Well,
part of it too is injuries happen all the time, so it wouldn't surprise me if Mullins, again as the QB2, maybe gets moved by the trade deadline. If a team loses their starting quarterback and they're kind of like how we got Dobbs last year, where a team maybe looking to add a veteran. I don't think there's much dead cap space or anything. So again, it's strictly on the benchmarks for JJ, and if he meets those, then and they're comfortable with rolling him as the number two. I can see that as a plausible thing that happens too.
Absolutely, and we don't have a 7th round pick next year. So
hardly any.
that would be perfect. Trade Mullins if we don't need him for a conditional 7th. I Bleav that's pretty close to what we got him for in the
Yeah.
first place.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw talking about Mullins or the passing game in general. Yannick Eckhart, a friend of the show, he tweeted today, and I had no idea how this worked out, so I had to do the homework. When you don't take into account lost yards by sacks, because usually that factors into a passing stat, the Vikings led the NFL in passing yards last year with 4,700 passing yards altogether, which really surprised me because you had a quarterback carousel for over half the season with Mullins, Hall, and Dobbs. So unbelievably, the Vikings at 4,700 passing yards led the NFL. On the QB1 versus QB2 or QB3 question, I think we've already kind of divided into camps, at least how to set the table. Like, I absolutely believe in my heart of hearts that Sam Darnold is the QB1 no matter what. Even if McCarthy looks like a stud in the preseason, I don't think the Vikings are a team that's going to just say, hey, go for it right away. So I appreciate the Paul Allen talker that says, this might be a QB2 battle because it really pumps the brakes on folks. I mean, you see an article about once a week that says, not so fast, JJ McCarthy can win this thing. And I would love for that to happen. I don't know. I just have it baked in my DNA that the Vikings don't do that. And therefore, I know it's going to be Darnold week 1. And the conversation, rightfully so, because of PA, is, hey, who's going to be QB2, Mullins or McCarthy? Again, there is precedent for this. It doesn't mean that McCarthy's a bust if they truly do sit on him for an entire year. The guy just turned 21 in January, and that's about as young as it can get for a quarterback. So that's where we're at on the QB battle. I got a couple more things for you guys. Ron, I'm going to ask you this one. With these camp battles, see, we have WR's 3. We have defensive tackle if Jerry Tillery hasn't won that outright. Maybe the determination of the other starting cornerback. Maybe the tight end if TJ Hawkinson's out. I want to ask you, out of all those battles, or maybe it's just the quarterbacks, what is the one that you're most looking forward to at the end of July and into August?
Well, I feel like the defensive line for me is going to be the biggest because really, in my mind, we only have one guaranteed starter, and that's Harrison Phillips. I think the rest are truly up for grabs. I know Bullard last year, and even when he was a rotational player in years past, like he doesn't make mistakes. He's not flashy by any means. He doesn't, jump out on tape, but he seems to always be in the right spot. So I think that gives him a leg up. Now, obviously, Tillery, again, I've mentioned I was a big fan of his coming out of Notre Dame when he got drafted by the Chargers. So I'm happy to have him in the mix, 6'5", 315. He's a guy he can move. So I would like to see him, find that home and excel. But yeah, other than that, Tyler mentioned Levi Drake. Like a guy that works hard. When there's an open battle like this, I feel like it can push everyone on the group to just be better, at least get the best out of them. Because, let's call a spade a spade. It's no first round pick at any point in their career wants to be beat out by a 7th round pick. You'd think there's a first round pick from Notre Dame, nonetheless, from 7th round pick out of Texas Commonwealth, whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's got to be a pride aspect there. So I think it'll only bring out the best in people. And I'm not saying this in the sense of that I anticipate he's going to have a career like this guy, but his story and where he's come from reminds me a lot of John Randall in the sense that small, unknown school, unknown football school, hard worker seems to, everyone raves about his personality and, kind of what he brings to the table. But, Bryant, you played with a lot of players. I'm sure you when you come from an unknown school, a football school, like these, like it takes that extra work to get noticed, even to be able to be like, you obviously were, on the Heisman ballots, all that, and one of the greatest teams ever to play. No one's gonna miss you on film, but if you're going up against an Appalachian State type school, and some guy's able to show that he belongs, like I feel like those are the stories you like to root for, and so I'd like to see him get some run, and we'll see what happens.
Bryant, they're on shows like this, guys like me or NFL writers, we put a lot of time into thinking about these camp battles. Do players, probably not you, because you always had the job on lock, do players know if they're in a position battle? Like, it's probably not listed on the wall or anything, but do they know, like, hey, I got to be going through this?
There's depth charts up there too, so people know.
Okay.
You see the depth chart, so you know where you stand. And some guys, especially like the 2s and 3s, especially in training camp, they're trying to make sure they're on a certain part of the depth chart so they don't get cut, so they can make the team. So there's definitely some battles, and I mean you can see it. You can see who's on the borderline of making a team. So it's a lot of competition, and then it's really about who can execute. Because everybody aren't great practice players. Some guys really like turn it on when the lights come on, and that's the most important part. Is some of those guys are really good once the lights come on, and seeing how they perform in game time situations. So some guys are practice players and they get out there and they don't do as well on game situations. So all that has to come together, and then you really get to see who is what.
So you mentioned, sorry, Dustin, but just follow up there. You mentioned depth charts in general. Obviously, I'm sure the head coach, puts all that together and everything. But how much say does a positional coach have in elevating a player on a depth chart, whether it be from, you know, let's say practice squad type player into rotational type player? Does a position coach have that input that they can go to the head coach and be like, hey, this guy?
They definitely put input because I mean they're in charge of that position. So if they see a guy that's playing well, they're going to mention it to the coach, and then the coach will start eyeing the guy too and seeing, okay, he is playing well, and he'll start rotating that guy in with the 2s or sometimes even with the 1s, and see how they handle that level of competition, and then they start making decisions from there.
I was going to ask you this because now I'm really curious. The general public, we don't get a depth chart until like late in August. Do you guys have one like before training camp?
There's one on the wall. Like,
no way.
Yeah,
Whoa.
when you go into like training camp, there's a depth chart like on the wall. I think like by where you weigh in or something, and let you know who's one. Like, I mean, you have to know where you are on the depth chart.
Well, yeah, but you can imagine my surprise. I didn't know that. I'm 40 years old.
Oh, yeah, it definitely is. Because you got to know who the starters are and things like this. So you have to know where you are, what groups you're in. So there's definitely a depth chart when you walk in. Like
Sounds like
when training camp starts, you know where
sounds
you
like
are on the depth chart. And some guys work their way up, and some guys don't.
sounds like the old school days of, like, trying out for basketball and, like, are you on the A team, B team, C team? Where are you at? Everyone can see it.
I mean, you have to have one because you have to know, guys have to know where they are, far as in rotation. So, if you're with the 1s, 2s, or 3s.
Let me ask you this too, because I'm just learning a bunch of shit here tonight. When Ron talked about the positional coach having a say, does a defensive coordinator, does he make the depth chart on defense, or does the head coach, even if he's not really?
I think it's a combination of each position. They determine who is where on their depth chart, and I think they do run it by the head coach. But it's based off, I feel like, the position coaches who come up with who they feel like are the top people in those positions, who they want to be starters and who's the backup. And the head coach may, if he may feel different about something, he can change it. Like he will override things though, but the position coach pretty much for the most part comes over.
Okay.
This
think
is
the
going to
perfect
be such an
example of
odd
that.
question. But is this depth chart within plain view of credentialed media members? So do they already know in advance?
I don't feel like the media comes into that part of the locker room where it is during training camp. So that's probably why they never see it. But we see it. I mean, we see it because that's where we are. But we have to walk past it. Or even if they do, they probably don't pay it no mind because it's not something it's a paper on the wall. So it's like they may overlook it just because they're worried about getting their interviews in, and they're not really paying attention. There's a depth chart on the wall. If they really look around, you'll see it.
I think, Dustin, to your point when you said, like, you brought up the defensive coordinator and head coach or whatnot, I think the perfect example is Justin Jefferson as a rookie with Mike Zimmer as a coach. Like, he wasn't doing anything with the offense, but Jefferson was still on the bench for Tajay Sharp. So
Yeah, no, that if we need any more evidence, that's the one that the head coach has obviously got his face in there. Tyler, we kind of got off course, but I want to ask you, camp battles, which one, among several, are you most looking forward to?
Honestly, it's corner, and
Yeah.
obviously, there's the loss of Kyrie Jackson, and I'm not going to go too much into that. It's kind of soon. Uh, but regardless, even before we drafted Kyrie, this was such a fascinating position group as a whole, because you have sort of the incumbent, Caleb Evans, who was a fourth round draft pick, beat out a second rounder in Andrew Booth Jr. for that outside corner job. But then you have Mekhi Blackman, who was like a late third round pick. Now he's sort of creeping in on a Caleb Evans for that sort of outside corner spot beyond just Shaq Griffin and Byron Murphy. And then not only just who wins cornerback 3, but how many snaps does the third cornerback in this defense get in relation to Josh Metellus, who's the third safety, who will be deployed quite a bit? How much does cornerback 3 actually matter in the grand scheme of things? I mean, obviously, for depth purposes, it's great to have, 3 really competent guys out there. But if Metellus is out snapping, say, a Caleb Evans, then it really doesn't matter as much.
Yeah.
So I'm just really interested to see, how that shakes out with cornerback 3 and how they allocate those snaps. Oh, and then like I think Booth, between those 3 guys I just mentioned, is probably closer to cornerback 5. But then you also have Dwight McGlothern, who they paid quite a bit of money to sign as an undrafted free agent. So that's really interesting too, because I feel like Dwight McGlothern is a better instinctual player, but a lot poorer of an athlete, whereas Booth is the total opposite. He's an elite athlete who can never stay healthy, and his instincts aren't the greatest. So I'm going to be really interested to see if Flores prefers to keep a guy who has a lower ceiling but a higher floor as that 5th corner versus an Andrew Booth, where it's like maybe Kwesi says, hey, I invested a 2nd round pick in this guy and he still has a lot of potential. Let's keep him as the 5th corner, because after all, Flores did say at one point Booth was playing well in practice and deserves more snaps. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to hold up by the end of this training camp, but it's just the whole position is really interesting to me.
Mine is the third wide receiver, and it's not for a traditional mindset like I'm just yearning to figure out who that's going to be. It's twofold for different reasons. Because TJ Hawkinson probably won't be there at the start of the season, somebody is going to get a lot more targets than they usually would, because usually Hawkinson gets a pretty substantial slew of targets. But from the offseason puzzle behind me, I want to know which one of these guys, current wide receivers, they trusted that much, because Kevin O'Connell and this coaching staff doesn't seem like an offense that's like, you know what, we don't care who WR3 is, it's going to be fine. They feel like a staff that is the anti-Zimmer, that says we need a robust WR3, and they had so many chances, and they still do, between Michael Thomas and Hunter Renfrow to get one. And for going on 4 months now, they just refused to sign anybody that's high profile. Like Tyler Boyd was available for a couple months, and that was on the 3rd wave of free agency. Then this draft was really deep for these types of players, WR3s, and didn't draft anybody. So I just want to know which guy that they had these grand plans for, because it would seem really weird if they just don't care about it. Now, as a Vikings fan for almost, coming up on 30 years now, and then the last 10, I'm used to WR3 not being a big deal. So it's not that I desperately need this fixed. I trust this offense to figure it out. It's just one of the guys has to win it, and I want to know who it is, because they evidently have had a lot of faith in that. All right, Bryant, we won't talk again for about 2 weeks, so what do you got going on the next couple of weeks?
Well, I got a question about something.
Yeah, let's hear it.
The player who passed away, the 4th round draft pick, like what happens with that? Like, because he didn't even get a chance to, I don't even know if his contract got finished, or how do they try to fill that space or like what happened. Like I don't really understand because I've never really heard this happen before.
Oh, you mean what happens for his family or the Vikings?
Kind of both.
Okay. With the Vikings, I think it's just too bad, so sad.
Okay.
In terms of, I don't think they get any compensatory pick. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's just tough shit. On the family, I don't know that one. That one, I would actually, if roles reverse, I'd ask you. But I don't know the answer to that. Do you guys have any theories?
Yeah, I think at least the guaranteed money still goes to his estate. He did sign the contract before he passed away. So he's still going to get what he's, owed guaranteed money wise in that contract. Now, I don't know specifically for, just like the incentive based things, how that works. You would have to ask like a capologist because it's such a rarity that a player who has never played a single snap for a team passes away and is under contract, and it's just such a tragic thing that happened. But yeah, no, that whole conversation is really interesting, and I don't know the entirety of it. I just know that guaranteed money is guaranteed life or death. So,
and I think
Well-
that for a fourth rounder is probably about $1 million, right? Roughly.
yeah, pretty close, couple million maybe.
Yeah.
And Bryant, like obviously, like yours is going to be on a different scale, being a first round pick, and always, like compensated, more than a fourth round pick. But like, what's the like? Is there like a life insurance plan with the NFL? Like, just like my employer, we have a life insurance plan. Like, is there stuff like that that's pretty? I would assume any of that. Then, like going back to like Sean Taylor, for example. Now he was in the league for a few years, so that was a different situation. But I imagine, yeah, like Tyler said, it's whatever's in the contract. He's earned, but I'm sure it's going to be a legal battle one way or another, just because the team lawyers are probably going to be looking at it like, well, he didn't meet the roster bonuses because he wasn't part of the roster. That type, like, there's that dirty side of things that you never want to have to deal with, but
Right.
someone's going to be looking like a bad guy, like trying to fight for it. But
I just never heard this happening, like leading up to training camp before. That's why.
Right. And yeah, Corey Stringer was before you got there, so
He was like a year
Yeah.
year before Bryant got there.
I don't
Corey
think
Stringer.
they
Yeah,
would.
but he was already under contract. Like he was, it wasn't like he was like getting drafted and going.
Oh yeah. He'd been with the Vikings for about
Yeah.
what 4, 5 years, 6 years.
Yeah, I remember. I used to watch him, so I kind of remembered. I remembered him.
Yeah.
But he was already in the league for a few years. So I was just saying, from a standpoint of a guy who just got drafted, who was just about to, really
Yeah.
officially join the team. I'd never seen that before.
Yeah.
I just want to say too, I don't think like owners or anyone on the team, even lawyers, would even consider trying to just pinch money out of that contract to say, hey, we don't, owe this, they owe guaranteed money. They can't weasel their way out of that. That's ironclad. And even if they tried to like debate, hey, do we pay this out to you or not? Like, that's just such a bad look PR wise to say, hey, your son's dead and we're gonna pinch pennies out of you as you're dealing with like funeral costs and all the expenses that death brings.
Some owners around different leagues.
I was wondering, like,
Yeah.
what happened as far as like with the family, and then as far as with the team, do they kind of use like money that would have been for him, like to get somebody else, or I was just wondering.
If
What
I
I
had
would guess
Mhm.
is like the first thing that they like he would be essentially put on some sort of exempt list, like much like like when you get like a non-football injury or whatever. Like there's so many different lists out there, so it'll probably have him on there so that he's able to get whatever benefits, contracts, that type of stuff. But then essentially opens up a spot on that 90-man roster. With you'll probably hear that that'll get filled at some point, but um, yeah, let's hope we never have to worry about that again. Because yeah, I mean, a lot 24-year-old was lost.
Yeah, we got too many tragedies in the Vikings orbit, especially since Corey Stringer died in 2001. I'm gonna guess. So the Wilfs have owned this team for about 20 years now, And I don't recall a whole lot of stories of them being cheap or screwing.
Me neither.
Yeah.
No.
So I'm going to guess if this comes down to it, that they would err on the side of humanity and do the right thing. And I don't know if we'll ever know for sure what happens on it because, to Bryant's point, it's so unprecedented. But I would bet that the Wilfs take care to the best they can or allowed to. Kyrie Jackson's family. All right, guys. The next time we'll talk will be a few days into training camp. That'll be on the 24th. We think Sally will be back. Tyler, we appreciate you joining tonight. And to the rest of you, we'll talk to you in 2 weeks, okay?
Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks. Later.
Have a good one.